The time now for the Scramble Podcast alongside my podcast and broadcast partner, Chris Flynn, member of the Canadian Football Hall of Fame. I am Paul Hollingsworth. I'm in Halifax, Chris, inside of our CTV studios here, taking a moment away from break. You're in beautiful Long Lake, Quebec, in the coolest podcast studio known to mankind, with the backdrop looking very good. Let's get into it. We have about 20 minutes or a half hour to burn through some things here. We set up last week AUS football activity. So tonight we have St. FX battling against Acadia, and tomorrow it is Mount A at St. Mary's. Again, it's that battle for home field position for those second and third, fourth place spots, the way it's shaping out. A very competitive conference so far. And I would submit to you also a hard conference to predict once you get past Bishops when it comes to how those teams could seed and how they do against each other on a night-by-night basis.
Yeah, that's right. I think the three of the teams that make the playoffs, they don't want to meet up with Bishops necessarily. So you could see possibly St. FX and St. Mary's fighting for that, maybe second and third spot, and Acadia and Mount A fighting for the fourth playoff spot. But who knows? Even Acadia and Mount A they're only one or two games behind. It's a very close race. So yeah, they're trying to make the playoffs and maybe try not to finish in fourth place either. So they have to play Bishop. So it's a couple of big games again this weekend. You mentioned the game tonight, and then I think St. Mary's and Mount A tomorrow. So should be interesting as usual.
You have played many games at St. Mary's on a Saturday in a home field setting. Admittedly, back when you played and you were winning your 3 Heck Crichton Awards, the team was much more on the winning side than this generation of the Huskies team that seems to be rebuilding itself back to being a more competitive program. How much do you miss those days? How much did you enjoy those days? Take us back to a Saturday afternoon at Husky Stadium with Coach Utek on the sidelines and Chris Flynn and the Huskies running onto the field with several thousand people there. It's a great memory for me as a fan. What was it like for you playing in it?
Well, yeah, we didn't have Friday night games back when I played, for example. They play Friday nights very often. It was always Saturday. So, yeah, tomorrow they play Thanksgiving weekend. Actually, what it reminds me of is my first year, I think we played Acadia on TSN on Thanksgiving weekend, and it was one of our biggest game. That was the kind of almost the game that turned our program around my first year. And I remember it was Thanksgiving weekend, and again on TSN against Acadia. So that's just an exciting memory you just made me think of just now as we enter Thanksgiving weekend. It was once upon a time, but always great memories, and I hope to get back there again soon for a visit.
Well, we have other football things to delve into, but since we're talking AUS, let's do a little pivot here to soccer. A national championship caliber soccer team, the University of Cape Breton men's soccer team, has been forced to forfeit 6 games. 4 of them were wins, 2 of them were ties, for using players that did not comply with the eligibility rules. I want to read that terminology correctly in exact language. Look, thankfully, this doesn't happen very often, but it's a reminder that these are academic institutions. These are competitive athletes who have to play by a set of rules, and they are governed by an association that takes those rules quite strictly. I mean, you come from that world of AUS/AUAA competitive sports. This is a tough punishment, but I guess a reminder that you have to play by those rules at the strictest level.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what happened, what rules they didn't abide by, but yeah, that's devastating news for the program. I think they're a pretty good team as well, but like you said, there's rules in place. It's happened to some other schools in the past. I think it happened to St. Mary's as well. So it's not the first time it happens, but when it does happen, it's pretty upsetting for all. I feel bad for all those players on the team that maybe had nothing to do with whatever this ineligibility rule happened with this one player or whatever. So I feel bad for the program, but as you said, these are rules that all the schools have to abide by.
And I guess, we'll jump on to different topics here, but just to finish on the thought that you had there, the people who are not ineligible and their families who are having a soccer experience and a terrific student athlete experience that extended to their families who broke no rules. I feel nothing but empathy for them. It must be a tough moment. So we hope that they bounce back quickly. But as Chris mentioned, we've seen these situations before, and it happened in St. Mary's back in the 1980s. And the program that it impacted bounced back in a very healthy and competitive way going forward. So we'll keep our eye on that story and make sure that they hope that we'll cheer for them to have some more successful outcomes in the future. All right, so let's pivot to football here now. NFL football. Aaron Rodgers is in the middle of a lot of stuff in New York. Now there's a former football coach who got fired, and the question is, was Rodgers a part of it? Just jump on it from there. What's your read in the situation? What's your reaction to the situation? And it's another example of Rodgers sort of mixed up in something, isn't it?
Yeah, if we go back to last week's show, I actually, kind of predicted that the Jets would bounce back from their terrible loss against the Broncos. A few weeks ago, I said that they would, and Rodgers would bounce back and beat the Vikings, and they got off to a tough start. I think they were down 13-0 or 17-0, but they came back in the second half. They got to within 6 points. They needed, a touchdown to win. And I'm watching that game on Sunday morning, and they get into Minnesota's end. They're first down on like Minnesota's 40-yard line, and Rodgers, they run a little hook and go with Wilson. He's like wide open for a touchdown, and Rodgers just throws like 5 yards over his head. Wasn't even close, which is really surprising to see Rodgers do that. I think he thought he didn't have time or whatever, and then a few plays later, he's throwing the same go route to Williams down the sideline. This time he underthrows it terribly to low and to the inside, right at the DB. The DB intercepts it. So he gets intercepted, and then they lose. It's a game they could have won. They lost. And my point is, if had they won, Saleh would still be on the sideline this weekend coaching. So this was Sunday. Monday night, the owner, Woody Johnson, calls Rodgers, and they chat on Monday night, and then Tuesday morning, apparently the owner went in there. It was only a minute and a half meeting with Coach Saleh. Basically, he didn't give him any explanation, just told him they're going in a different direction, and Saleh's gone. It's just it's unbelievable, and I guess it's to me, it's like, why would they do that? Like, what's the purpose? He's a defensive coach, Saleh. After game 5, they get rid of the coach. It didn't even make any sense to me and to a lot of other football people. But one thing I think is there was a friction. There was a friction between Rodgers and Saleh, and the owner, Woody Johnson, said, how do I get rid of this friction? And he fired the coach. Rodgers said he had nothing to do with it, but I think pretty clearly he did. And as bad as it seems, I got a couple of buddies that are Jets fans, Eric Roy and Sean Finn, and they're always kind of pessimistic. They have a right to be, just from the many years of losing with the Jets and everything. But as bad as everything is right now, they play the Bills on Monday night. If they win that game, they're in first place. So it seems all gloom and doom, but if they win the next game, they're in first place. I think Miami Dolphins, apparently Tua might come back in a few weeks, but I don't think Miami's going to be a threat this year. Definitely New England is not. So it's really, for that division, it's between the Jets and the Bills. So again, as bad as it seems for the Jets right now, if they win on Monday, they're in first place. So, I just didn't like what happened with Saleh, and it does happen. It's a business, but I just didn't like the way it all came down this past week, and I just wanted to, comment on that today.
Let's break it down a couple of ways. I want to return to Rodgers' playing ability as a follow-up question in a moment, but like, you follow football at a very sophisticated level. Anyone who knows you knows this. Your intuition, watching the situation, I mean, do you believe he got him fired? Like, what's your gut tell you?
Let's just say he could have not got him fired. He could have said because the owner calling the quarterback on a Monday night, chatting, they apparently both said, oh, we talked about other stuff, but not about the coach. But then the next morning, the coach is getting fired. So Rodgers said he had nothing to do with it. He was shocked. But really, if Rodgers wanted him to still be the coach, he would still be the coach. That's in my opinion.
And on Rodgers' playing ability he's a Hall of Fame quarterback. That's undeniable. But the way he's playing right now, you mentioned that second play that led to the interception. That was a go, the go route. I looked at that when it happened, and I saw a quarterback who was showing his age. Now, again, I don't watch the game and see the game the same way you see it. Did you see the same thing, or do you have any concerns about the way he's playing at this stage of his career?
I actually feel like he's still playing pretty good. He seems like he's pretty quick on his feet too. That game against New England, he played excellent. I thought he moved around really well too. When you lose, everything is so extreme. Everyone's saying how terrible the Jets are. I don't think they're terrible. They could have beat Denver. If he completes that one pass to Wilson for a touchdown, they would have beat Minnesota. They could be 4-1 right now, although a lot of teams could say that. A lot of the games are close, but I don't feel like his skill is diminished that badly. They are struggling on offense a little bit. It's just more his, I guess, sometimes his attitude and behavior that irks people, and maybe, if you're fighting with the coach, that's the other players see that too. I'm not saying for sure he got him fired, but it's just a gut feeling I had from outsiders' view.
Yeah, well, I will say this as we wrap up this part of the segment on Rodgers. I have no real heavy opinion in this. I don't cheer for Aaron Rodgers. I don't cheer for the New York Jets. I have nothing against him from the perspective of a fan. But for people who say he's hard to like, I understand where they're coming from. And this is a week that he probably didn't need when it comes to that sort of narrative being mixed in, because controversy seems to surround him to a certain level. But his ability and his career and the body of work, undeniably, I'd have him on my team any day. There's no question.
He's a Hall of Famer for sure.
Yeah, without question. Before we jump to the NCAA and talk a bit of Deion Sanders and the NCAA in general, any other storylines from the NFL leading into this weekend jumping out to you?
Yeah, good, interesting weekend as usual. There's a few games. I didn't mention Dallas last weekend as one of my top teams, and I still don't think they are, but they're a team that could make the playoffs, and they're hosting Detroit on Sunday, and Detroit is definitely a playoff caliber team. So that will be an interesting game. Dallas just beat Pittsburgh. If they can beat Detroit, wow, they're back. They're back in the thick of things. For the playoffs and being a legitimate contender. But we'll see what happens on Sunday against Detroit.
Last week, Colorado with the off week, Deion Sanders gets removed from the news cycle, but for a few days. Now they're back, and he's back on the sidelines this weekend. Just set us up on a weekend of Deion. What are you looking for? How do you think it shapes up?
Yeah, unfortunately, that game's only, I think it's on 10:15
Yeah.
Eastern, so 11:15 Atlantic. So I don't know if I'll actually be watching that game, but it's always fun to like I said last week, definitely a polarizing figure and team, but I like following them, and should be interesting. They're playing Kansas State. I think they're ranked 18th. So if they beat Kansas State, man, they'll be ranked for sure, I think, at the top 25 and have a chance to make that 12-team playoff at the end of the year. And I'll just go back from last week, that Vanderbilt game beating Alabama. Wow, that's what college football is all about. Taking down the goalposts and taking it through the town and throwing it in the river. I love that. That's what I love about the college football in the States. It's pretty exciting. I guess Vanderbilt, that was the first time they beat them in 40 years, something crazy.
Yeah.
So that was a very exciting game, or even just seeing the highlights of that game last weekend.
Back in my TSN full-time days, I was in Tennessee on an assignment. I forget what story I was covering, and the hotel where I was staying, I pull the drapes and I look out, and I'm looking over Vanderbilt University. And so I cleared my decks on the Saturday afternoon, and I went to my balcony of my hotel room, and I leaned over the balcony and I watched the NCAA game from 40 floors up, looking down in the field. And it would be like the high rise at St. Mary's overlooking the football field. You were right there. And I had no idea, because the way I came into the hotel, I did not know that on the back of it was the athletic facilities for the campus. So whenever I think of Vanderbilt, I think of an accidental magical moment in my sports viewing experience, which was really, really fun.
Wow,
speaking of my sports viewing experiences, I've covered literally dozens and maybe over 100 baseball games this time of the year in Major League Baseball. Those days are behind me, but the action continues. Detroit Tigers, really fun to watch. Kansas City Royals, the music stopped for them, but they had a great run. The New York Mets, I never thought I'd be growing up an Expos fan. You'd never hear me cheering for the Mets, but the Mets are pretty easy to like. And the New York Yankees got their ticket punched. There's a lot to unpack of what I just said there, but we have hope springs eternal that we could have a Subway Series. And what an entertaining few weeks of baseball and a few days of baseball we've seen.
Absolutely. I don't necessarily watch baseball a lot during the regular season. I keep up with the standings, and I'll definitely watch the Blue Jays if they're doing well. But uh, playoff baseball is pretty exciting. The last few nights been really good games, and there's been some kind of like new teams in the playoffs, teams that haven't been in the playoffs for a while, like Detroit and the Mets and Kansas City. So it's been fun watching these teams that haven't been in it in a long time. And yeah, I just realized last night, it's like, whoa, there's four Final Four is almost here. It could be, yeah, it could be the Mets and the Yankees. That would be amazing. You might be able to tell me, has that ever happened before in the World
Yeah, it
Series?
happened back, I think it was 1999. I
Okay.
believe it was 99. Clemens was on the mound, Mike Piazza,
Yes.
they had a run in. Forgive me, it was Steve, my good friend Steve Phillips was the general manager of the Mets back in those days. But yes, it has happened. And of course, way back, the Brooklyn Dodgers and the New York Yankees having the Subway Series was almost an annual tradition. So there's when you're talking Subway Series, you're messing around with some really cool history on and like to read about and get into. So I think it'd be almost worth a last minute Hollingsworth vacation for a couple of days to go down and try to see that, because it'd be pretty cool. But no, but you're right, baseball has been really, really enjoyable. And look, I had I don't want to go too deep into this part of it, but when they expanded the playoff format, as an ex-Expos fan, I didn't like it because the Expos made the playoff one year. If this wild card format had it existed when the Expos were around, they would have made the playoffs in 79, in 80, in 81, in 85, I think, in 87, in 92, in 93, and 96. The point of the matter is, I was frustrated by it because I was thinking, now you've done that, because had you done that way back then, you might have saved the franchise I cheered for. Now you mature a little bit, you take a deep breath, and you pull back the lens and you look at it. The more playoff teams and the more substantive the playoff races are leading down in September, the better it is for the game. And we're seeing it now. I mean, the Detroit Tigers a month ago, in a season that existed 25 years ago, would have no business having dreams for a playoff run. And now they're daydreaming about going to the World Series. It just goes to show this expanded playoff format has injected excitement into the game, as evidenced by the fact we're talking about it right now.
Yeah, and same thing with the Mets. I think
Yeah.
the Mets just barely made it too. And we're talking about a Subway Series. They'd still have to beat the Dodgers or Padres, two
Yeah.
outstanding teams. But it's fun to see these teams in it, and it's tough for the teams who do win the pennant and do have great records. And those records don't necessarily matter in the playoffs. It's almost more who's the hotter team in the playoffs that as opposed to 30, 40 years ago, that was just the top teams that made the playoffs in
Yeah.
baseball. Unlike hockey, where half the league does make the playoffs. So, but it does make for exciting baseball, and everyone likes playoffs, no matter what sport it is. So, I've enjoyed watching some of the games this past couple of weeks.
As have I, and I'm also enjoying to watch the Montreal Alouettes back in action during this holiday weekend after having their bye week last week. Alouettes a little bit banged up, slumping. Slump's too big of a word, but after dominating for the first 10 or 11 games, they've come down to earth a little bit. So just a bit of a shout out to our friends who enjoy the CFL out there. The CFL is getting more action packed as we hit crunch time in this portion of the schedule. So, Chris, let us wrap it up there. It's a beautiful Friday night. I wish you a happy Thanksgiving to you and your family and all your friends in
Same
Quebec.
to you, Paul.
Yeah, and to all of our watchers and listeners, happy Thanksgiving, happy holidays. And Chris and I will be back within the week, but we might have an emergency podcast pop up. You never know. Something news making may happen that requires us to jump online sooner rather than later. But until next time, thank you all for watching the Scramble Podcast.